The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith will have approximately 4 minutes, and then we'll have to go to the right of reply. The honourable member.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I stand in support of this private member's bill, and C-331, and I'd like to thank the honourable member from New Westminster for his work on this bill. It's a very important piece of legislation. Speaking from personal experience, as a Canadian, I've had experience traveling in Central America. In the 90s, I was in Guatemala. My younger brother was part of the Managua team with the United Nations, and my parents and I were involved in human rights accompaniment with trade union activists who were trying to organize maquilas, the factory workers in Guatemala, and also working with people who were taking forward human rights complaints. And I spent some time traveling around Central America, and I had a Canadian flag on my back, and I could see in different places where I went, in Nicaragua and El Salvador, there were Canadian flags on bridges that had been built with Canadian money. And people thanked me for, being Canadian and being there. And for our country and the role that we played, after the civil wars in Central America. In 2014, I went back to El Salvador to take part in a delegation on mining. And I was doing research for a film on investor-state dispute settlements and looking into the case of Pacific Rim versus El Salvador. And in that case, environmentalists who stood up against this mine that nobody in the country wanted because it was going to destroy the watershed that provided water to 60% of the population. 5 environmentalists were murdered. People had to leave the country as refugees because of the thugs that were involved with the mining company. And I took part in a conference where there were delegates from Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador, and they all explained situations that were happening in their countries. They had photos and video. I documented this conference and I put it up on my YouTube channel. But the whole time, I was hearing about Canadian mining companies and how they were involved in these projects in communities where they were unwanted, and they ended up hiring thugs to intimidate local Indigenous people and force them into accepting projects that they didn't want, that were destroying their communities, destroying their local environment, destroying their way of life. And people were having to leave their homes under the threat of violence, and people were being murdered and abused and sexually assaulted. And to me, it was a very shameful experience. And to know that we have companies abroad who are involved and engaged in these activities was very disheartening, and I thank the honourable member for this work. I think this is a very important bill that people in these situations should be able to seek redress in this country and to get justice, and to ensure that Canadian corporations abroad are responsible for the behaviour of the people that they hire and work with in these countries. So thank you to the honourable member for New Westminster.